Okay, so it is 11:02, and I know that there's a lot to cover today. So uh, just a little bit of quick introduction. Again, this is the SORA summer webinar. A little bit of housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded, and it will be posted on our YouTube afterwards. So you should have access to it there. So this will be available afterwards if you want to come back to it, all those sorts of things. So thank you so much for being here today, and I won't take any more of Meenakshi's time. Meenakshi, please go ahead and introduce yourself, and let's get started with the presentation.
Well, thanks, Jacob. So good morning, everybody. My name is Meenakshi Rao, as you can probably read on the slide as well. Jacob and I are teammates. We both work in the data governance and transparency team led by Catherine Helms, the Chief Data Officer for the state. And we both live in DAS, if that is of interest to you. It is of interest if you want to email me. So I want to begin by telling you a little bit about how this talk came about. I have a very strong data analysis background, but since I've been in my new job, which is 2 years now, which is data equity consultant, I haven't really had a chance to actually work with data, and I needed an excuse to do it. Oops. Okay, can everybody else hear me? Okay. For a moment there, I thought I was talking to myself. Okay, so let's continue. So I wanted an opportunity to do some analysis. And I suggested to Michael, well, I could talk about inclusive analytics because that would give me the opportunity to actually work with data. So this is a bit of an experiment. And thank you all for being guinea pigs. So let's begin by, inclusive analytics. That's the title of my talk, Going Beyond the Mean. And let's first begin with, what do we mean when we say analytics, right? Let's have a common understanding of what analytics mean. So when we talk about doing an analysis or analytics, usually we have a purpose. We have a question. We want to understand something better. We want to find something that went wrong. So we have a purpose. Then for that purpose, we pull some data together. We may have to actually go collect it, or we might want it might already be collected. We pull that data together, and then we run some kind of analysis on it. The analysis that we do, the type of analysis that we do, whether it's descriptive, diagnostic, etc., depends on our purpose. And then the methods, again, will depend, the methods that we use will depend both on the data and the purpose. So that is, when we are doing analytics, there is a purpose, there is data, and then there's the actual statistic techniques that we will use to do it. Okay, I'm sorry here for... So just kind of to give you a very simple example of what an analytical output might look like. This is a very, I think several of you are familiar with this. This is Florence Nightingale's Rose diagram that she used to show the deaths that were happening. She was a nurse in Crimea at this point, and surprisingly, what she found as she collected the data and tabulated it, that there were more deaths happening because of disease than because of the actual war going on. And so she collected the data. She had a purpose. She wanted then, once she knew that there was more deaths were happening because of disease, then she had a purpose. She wanted to get the money, the resources to actually improve the hygiene in these hospitals. And her analysis, she had collected the data, she now had a purpose, and her analysis was actually doing a visualization that was strong enough to kind of try to get the money from the people who funded this venture. So that's kind of a very simple and a very old example of an analysis. I wanted to definitely highlight the purpose there. So what do we mean by inclusive analytics? So when we're talking about inclusion, there are some questions we have to ask in these three parts of analysis. If we want to do an inclusive analysis, we've got to ask, does the purpose for this analysis actually benefit the people in the data? Not just one entity or the other, but the the people who are actually given us the data that we're going to be working with. Then when we look at the data for an inclusive analysis, we have to make sure that the data fits the purpose. Now, for Florence Nightingale, it was very simple because she collected the data, she knew the purpose, but in today's world, where our teams are very separated, somebody else might collect the data, somebody else sets the purpose, and then somebody else is doing the analysis. So for us, once we are beginning the analysis, we have to make sure that the data fits the purpose. And then when we actually are doing the analysis, we have to make sure that the analysis that we do actually respects the lived experience. We cannot reduce people to numbers. We have to think in terms of lived experience. And we also cannot take a single perspective. There are multiple people in the data with many different lived experiences. And as we go through and do the analysis, we cannot reduce them to a single number, a single mean. We have to try to keep those multiple perspectives in mind in our analysis. And finally, even though when we have a purpose, our analysis should be able to give the different dimensions of the different perspectives and of the people in the data, right? Not just a single purpose. We are the state. We cannot only talk about the purpose for the state. It's also the people in the data. How will they use it, and will they be empowered when they use it? So that's kind of inclusive. Inclusive analytics is really trying to humanize the data and respect the people in the data and everybody else impacted by it. So how do we kind of do inclusive analytics? I'm just going to give you a little bit of a way of thinking, framing about how to do it. So for the purpose, how does the purpose respect and benefit the humans in the data? And this is when we are trying to answer, when we have a purpose, we actually we try to examine who all is impacted by this, right? So when we take the Florence Nightingale example, the people impacted by it were the nurses who were working alongside Florence Nightingale, the soldiers in the hospital, as well as the British people who were behind the war, and then, of course, all the policymakers who were funding the war. So even though her purpose was just, improving the conditions there, when we are trying to do an analysis, we've got to see all of the people who are impacted by it. We have to make sure that the analysis, that the purpose is one that benefits the people in the data, because when we use data, we are using something that was entrusted to us, and we need to be respectful of that. And so we cannot use data from an ethical point of view. We cannot use data to actually harm the people who are in the data. Again, we have to look at we definitely have to look at the benefits. I only talked about, making sure that they were people who benefited. I only talked about do no harm, but we also have to make sure that there's actual benefit for all, at least some benefit for all the people, all the different people who are impacted by it. In today's day and age, when data is accessible to so many different people, and our analysis will be also available to a lot of different people, it's very important for us to examine the potential risks of doing this analysis and making the data, or at least the analytical results, available. So that is on the collective team that is doing this analysis. So that's about the purpose. When the second part of doing an inclusive analytics is actually the data, we have to make sure that the data is fit for purpose. And again, do we actually have the data to address the purpose that we have in mind? It's like often we fit the purpose to the data rather than the data to the purpose, as analysts, our focus tends to be very much on the data, and we sometimes forget that it's not the data that comes first, but the purpose. Since we did not collect the data, most cases, 99% of the cases today, we do not collect the data. We have to know how the data was collected, because how the data was collected, who collected the data, influences the quality of the data and whether it will be fit for the purpose, because you may or may not have all the fields that you're required for your analysis. So once you've got the data and you know why the data was collected and how it was collected, then you have to assess the quality of the data. But this includes things like, simple things that we do, like, how much data is missing, etc. And then again, from a privacy security point of view, we have to know what are the rules governing it. You definitely have to stay within the legal bounds. So you have to do some kind of review of the data before to make sure that it's fit for purpose. Since you do not collect the data, as I said, 99% of the time, the person doing the team doing the analysis does not collect the data. We then, or the team that is kind of going to be involved in data analysis, needs to practice good data governance. And that means I've put some of the things that good data governance implies, but the most important thing that the data collectors need to provide is what I would call a data biography. It's the simplest way of encapsulating information about the data to ensure that downstream use of it is consistent with the way it was collected and the quality and etc. So people can actually evaluate whether it's fit for the purpose they are going to be using it. So then the last part of it, the actual statistical method, the analytical techniques that we will use, and as well as the mindset when we do the analysis. The first thing we have to always keep in mind that there are people in the data, right? It's the lived experience. It's not just numbers. It's the lived experience that matters. And again, so when we are reporting, when we are doing that statistical analysis, we don't stop at that. We don't say it's the mean. We say what that mean means in terms of lived experience. And again, we talked about multiple perspectives. There are different people in the data. They have different impacts. They have different interests. And we have to make sure that we look at it as we are doing the analysis. We look at all these different perspectives. And finally, we will produce a report of some kind based on this analysis. And in order to empower the people who are in the data, we have to make sure that it is that the report is actually accessible not just that they can find it, but they can read it, understand it, and act on it. So that's kind of inclusive analysis then. Make sure that the data is fit for purpose, that the purpose itself is something that will benefit the humans in the data. And then the results will be used in a way will embody the different perspectives of the people in the data and also empower the people who are in the data. Okay, so that's kind of the very broad brush idea of inclusive analytics. But I'm going to add a little bit more about inclusive analytics that we sometimes forget because we're so focused on the analysis. And that is the way we do these analyses. All good analysis have to be transparent, they have to be reproducible, and there should be accountability built into our processes. They're transparent because the assumptions that you make, of course, affect the outcome and how it can be applied. So we have to be transparent. We are all human, we can make mistakes. So by being transparent, we also open up the possibility of corrections when we make mistakes. Reproducible, of course, it is a requirement. If it's not reproducible, it becomes a little bit of an opinion rather than something we can collectively agree and act on. And accountability is very important. Again, as I said, we, and in our case, the state, cannot be held, needs to be held accountable, right? We represent the people, and the people, we should be accountable to the people. And we have to have processes to be able to do that. Any analysis that we put forward should have processes that hold that analysis accountable, right? Which is like bug fixing, that as you hear from people that they need something different, or it could be improved upon, you have that continuous. That's kind of, we need to keep these processes and these kind of meta requirements in mind. So, and again, I'm just going to emphasize some things that we all know we need to do, but sometimes forget. When we are using a statistical tool, we have to make sure that all statistical assumptions are met. We quite often, I mean, I'm speaking for myself as well, quite often forget to do it. We just assume that it's all good. Make it a habit to run diagnostic tests. It's very important because that will also highlight if you have missed certain assumptions. Certain assumptions are not valid. So one thing I've learned over the years is always examine the outliers. Some of the most interesting things hide in those outliers. So some of very interesting stories. And again, it is very, especially from a reproducibility point of view, it's always good to report the source and describe all the data sets that were used in this analysis. So that's kind of, a little bit about inclusive analysis and the mindset that you bring to it of transparency, reproducibility, and accountability. So now that we've just talked in the abstract, we'll go through a very, very simple, it's really very simple example, a very simple analysis, and see how we can bring this inclusive thinking to it. So for the purposes of this, for this talk, I decided to use the state salaries database just because it is on the transparency website and it's accessible to everybody. And I sort of made up a purpose because, right, I do not, this does not have any users, etc. No, nobody's asking me as an analyst to do anything. So here's the made up purpose. Let's, how salaries and headcounts have changed over time, and how salaries and headcounts vary across agencies. So that's kind of the purpose as we are looking at it. And because I am doing this for this talk, I'm also adding that I would like this to be an example of an inclusive analysis. So, okay, so please join me on this journey. And please, if you have questions, suggestions, thoughts, let me know, put it in the chat, come off mute and talk, because this analysis has been done in the very recent past only for this. So it's meant more of an example for discussion and not as a tool. So let's begin with the first question about that we ask for inclusive purpose to make sure that our purpose is inclusive. We understand how to be inclusive as we go through this analysis. So who might be interested in a salary analysis? So we keep different perspectives in mind. State employees, right? We are talking about our salaries, and we'd be definitely interested in knowing what those salaries look like. Unions, the state employees are represented by several different unions, and they negotiate salaries for represented employees, not for all employees, for represented employees. So they might be interested in any analysis around salary. Legislators and agency heads might be interested because, of course, they have to sign off on the expenditure, right, or on employees, on employee salaries. And again, I think all of you are interested because you want to understand what inclusive analytics looks like. So you're not interested in analysis as such, but in the mindset for the analysis. Okay. So we've got several different perspectives and people who might be interested in this, and we'll look at what questions they might have later. Yes, so that, do you consider interested parties who might not want to use, the data, but actually for harm, not for benefit? That is a risk you have to consider when you're looking at the purpose, right? If you think by doing this analysis and by releasing the data, usually you're going to put people at risk, then you do not do the analysis. And in an ideal world, you are always in communication with the people in the data, so they can tell you, right? They can also tell you how much to release and to whom to release. We do not usually have, we are not at that maturity level yet, but in an ideal world, it would be a dialogue. And it would be a collective. The people in the data would be working with the people doing the analysis to make that decision. And it could be that in limited cases, the results are only released to the people in the data. Let's talk about health data. So maybe there's a group that is being studied for diabetes. They may not want the results to be known to the whole world, but they might want the analysis to be available only to them. So you definitely have to do those trade-offs and have the mechanisms for doing those trade-offs. So what benefits would we get if we do this analysis? A better understanding of salary trends and expenditures, which might or might not, influence future action. And again, the more important reason for this talk, a better understanding of how to do an inclusive analysis. Now, are there any risks? This is open data. I got it from the transparency website, and it's anonymized data. And so there is probably not going to be any risk. So I'm going to say minimum risk. You can never say no risk. So best to say minimal risk. Okay, so we've looked at the purpose, and we've looked at the risks and benefits and who the people are impacted by. Now let's look at the data itself. So what's in the data? It's got 7 columns, and I've got the names of the columns. I'll read it. It's got the fiscal year. So note it's the fiscal year. It's got the agency name. It's got a job classification. It's got the salary. It's got whether the job is full-time, part-time, or a job share. It's got a service type, and it's got an agency code. It's 339,000 rows in this data set. It was last updated. So this is all information from the transparency website. It was last updated in 30th September 2024. And it says it does not include lottery employees. So it does not include all state employees minus lottery employees. So we need to be very clear what is in the data and what is not in the data. What the data does not include is lottery employees. Hires after 30th, probably hires after 30th June because it's a fiscal year. You know, I do not know, Kimberly, why the lottery data, lottery employees are treated differently. Yeah, Paula? Paula?
Okay. Yeah, I was waiting for my mic to be enabled. The reason lottery employees are not included in this is they report separately because they had a systems change several years ago. So their salary data is in a separate data set associated with their system. So it is provided on the Oregon Transparency website and the Open Data Portal.
So based on what Paula is saying, I could have combined the 2 data sets, but I did not do so. So it's important to remember that this is fiscal year. So probably we have complete data for the 23-24 fiscal year. It's a good thing to keep in mind. Make sure that when we look at 24, it's really the 23-24 fiscal year. And it's a salary database, so we don't expect volunteers or contractors to be in it. So we've got a sense of what it is. Then I did basically I did a simple, summary of the data set, and this is kind of what I saw, that it has 10 years of data from 2015 to 2024, and then I made a note to myself to remember that it's fiscal year. I saw that it had 100 agency names, but only 89 unique agency codes. Okay, which kind of makes sense. I only did a spot check that yes, there are agency names that are kind of the same agency. They have the same code, but their names are a little bit different. Like instead of board, it's in one place it's BRD, in another. Sometimes the board comes before, like you have the medical imaging board, and sometimes you have a board of medical imaging. So yeah, so it looks like we should be using the agency code rather than the agency name when we are trying to come up with statistics about at the agency level. Interestingly, there were 296 NAs in the data. No, salaries were not available, which is kind of interesting. I mean, it's a huge. We have 399,000 rows. So 296 is a small fraction, but it's good to check that it's not some kind of a systemic error that will throw off a small piece. Oh, and interestingly enough, the salary range was from 0 to about 500,000. But why do we have somebody that has 0 salary? So we need to check that. I mean, is it a wrong assumption that volunteers are included? So So that's another thing that we have to check before we can say whether this data is fit for purpose. We saw that there are 3 different job classifications: full-time, different type classifications: full-time, part-time, job share, and it's no, it didn't have that code. Leave of absence wasn't there. And had 1675 job classifications, over 1,600 job classifications. I did not try to look at them. They're just too many. And there were 17 service categories. And I was not quite sure what service categories were. And so I looked at them. So I made a point to kind of, check out what does that mean, because I do not quite understand what that means. And so here are my checks. So the 296 of the 296 NAs, 290 were all for the first line over there, from the judicial system for part-time, and they were from 2015 to 2018. So something happened. They were probably changing systems or something. And then there were a few other NAs, and it just based on that, it was okay if we drop those NAs because there are very few, and it looks like that was omitting them won't really skew the results. There were two occurrences of a 0 salary. One of them was a volunteer, which is kind of interesting, and the other one was apparently represented. And again, this is kind of, if I was doing this for real, it is okay to drop them, but from a process point of view, I would touch back with I presume the people who maintain this data to say whether what's most likely, in my mind, what most likely happened, and this was, I talked to Paula a little bit about this, and she helped me think about it, was that probably somebody was made an offer, at the beginning, in the previous fiscal year, but they started in the next fiscal year. So they were entered into the system without actually receiving a salary then. But do not know. It's an assumption. But for this, again, we can drop those 2. It looks like it is safe to drop it. And there are very few job shares, and so we could probably combine job share and part-time. And there are not that many part-time workers either. It's about 1,000 each year. So as compared to about 46,000 employees altogether. So again, we can probably, if you're doing anything with full-time, part-time, we can probably not worry too much about it. Now, the service categories were interesting. It looked like they really had to do with our division into executive, judicial, and legislative. And it also looked like the same job classifications were repeated under these 3. And so it was like, okay, I'm not going to worry about it for this analysis. I didn't do anything related with service. So looking at all this, yep, it looks like the data is fit for purpose. And then here are my, as I was playing the data, some asides. The job classifications have changed over the years, but there is no crosswalk available, so we cannot say how. Let's just say this: agency head was one that I saw that has changed. So we cannot track it change year to year, like how this particular classification has changed, because they've changed the classification name and there's no crosswalk available. And just for convenience, I decided to use only 5 years of data, 2020 to 2024. And that also kind of makes the NA sort of less, the NAs and the salaries less, less of an inconvenience. And I was interested in this volunteer. And I just looked in the data to see how much, how many volunteers we had. And it's like and this is, I'm looking at this full, 399,000 rows, and they're like just very few volunteers. So my guess is there is not a check on that field, and people can enter what they like, and occasionally by mistake. But again, that's my assumption. I'm reading something to it because we like telling ourselves stories. So anyway, if anybody can answer that, like, why do we have volunteers in our salary database? I would really like to know. And one of them was actually a paid volunteer. So it's like, not my definition of a volunteer, but that's okay. So I should say at this point, looked at the data, got some insights into it, but it really looks like, for what you're trying to do, headcount and salary trends, we can use it. So let's begin the actual analysis. So the first thing is like, let's look at the salary trend. And so here's a bar graph. And again, this data is skewed, right? It's got a long tail. It's better to look at the median. And yes, when we look at the median here, as well as the bar graph, which is also the median, we can see the median salary is increasing year to year. The other thing that we can see from this chart is the number of employees is also increasing year over year from 2020 to 2024. Okay, that's our first insight into our trends. But let's look at total salary, right? From an agency head or the legislative perspective, they want to know how the total salary expenditure on state employees has changed. So here, the bar graph, as well as the total salary expenditure, which has grown from about 2.7 billion in 2020 to 4.1 billion in 2024. That's about a 53% increase in salary expenditure. Now, the median salary has grown 24.3%. The median salary has gone up, and then the number of employees has gone up. So obviously, the number of employees has increased, the salaries have increased. Obviously, our total expenditures have increased, as a combination of both. And then here is, if you're interested, here is a year-over-year increase in. That's an interesting question. Matthew has a question. I wonder if the rate of increase for employees matches the rate of increase for the population of the state. In other words, is there a higher, lower percentage of state employees when compared? I do not. That would be really interesting and actually fairly simple if I could, keep that thought in mind. And Max says, I wonder if the volunteers would be in the system for either reimbursement for incurred travel costs or perhaps the per diem compensation. And that's an interesting point. But if they are there because of that, it's a misuse of the system, right? It's not a salaries database. And given the fact given the fact that the volunteer, at least one of the volunteers, was zero, that is not the case. My guess is that for the volunteer that actually had a salary, it is possible that somebody volunteered and then was given a full-time job, and the entry in whatever system, I don't remember which year it was, did not update in time. Just because I'm seeing so few. But those are the kinds of things that we could talk about. It's really fun, but it would really be nice to get somebody who actually knows these systems. I don't know the system. I'm only looking at the data. Okay, so I am just assuming. Okay, Michelle says that they could be in there for purposes of workers' comp tracking. Okay, Michelle, I know nothing about workers' comp and tracking, so if you want to come off mute and tell us, I would love it. You don't have to. I'll pause, and if you don't show up, I will let it go. Be useful for all of us to know a little bit. I'm also seeing a comment from Kimberly, pandemic effect. There could be a pandemic effect. Oh, okay. Sorry, Michelle. Okay. If you don't mind just putting it in the chat. Yes, I forgot that this is in webinar mode, and I'm not the host. Okay, volunteers are okay, right? They have, I guess, interesting. So volunteers are tracked in workers' comp is what Michelle says, and whether that might have, since we have so few volunteers, my guess is that somebody confused the databases. Okay, so now we've looked at the total increase in salary expenditures, and we have some interesting questions about it, including the status of volunteers. But let's, since I was doing the analysis alone, I will go ahead and see. Using my imagination, I'm trying to think, okay, I've looked at a preliminary look at the data. I know what the purpose is, but what questions, what perspectives do I need to address? And from the legislators, agency heads, based on accountability, right? They're making this like, where is the, okay. Okay, I'm sorry, I got distracted by the chat. So one of the questions, the people funding, who decide how much money to be allocated for state employees, etc. It's like, is the increase in salary? Why is there an increase in salary? Are we increasing people's salary? Are we hiring more skilled people? Or is it because we are just, cost of living? Cost of living goes up every year, so they might want to know that. And also, where is the headcount? Right, we are increasing the number of people. Which agencies, and that might be which agencies are showing this growth? That might be of interest, right? Because the legislature probably might want to increase services in certain areas more than in others. So that might, and again, I'm using my imagination. There are definitely a lot of other questions. Ideal world, we will be communicating, we will be talking, so that the right questions will be put in. From the union perspective, I really think it would be, how does this fit in? I mean, is the median salary keeping up with cost of living? Because they negotiate that, right? So it would be important for them to make sure. And yes, and I'm open. What sort of questions would you have just looking at this data? Yeah, throw it into the chat. Yeah, I'm not going to pause for too long. So, okay. So now let's go in to try to answer. We've got this data set, we've got a purpose of trying to understand it, and then we're trying to look at how we might answer this question from different perspectives. So the first perspective we were taking was agency heads and legislature. Where did the headcount increase? So I've just given you it's sorted. I did it on absolute increase, not on percentage. Yes, it could, but we can definitely talk about it. Kimberly says it could be used in pay equity studies. Yes, it definitely could. We need a little bit more info for that, though. But we can definitely talk about it. I hope I leave enough time for discussion. So let me just kind of go through here. So here we are seeing, it's very interesting. We are increased huge, fairly big increases in Health and Human Services and OHA. Now that kind of makes sense. This data spans the pandemic. We know that we definitely wanted to have more people there. So at least intuitively, it makes sense. The other interesting thing was when we look at the so this is the percentage increase. There were two agencies that more than doubled, and housing and community services more than doubled. It grew 129%. And again, that sort of makes sense. We know homelessness and housing has been a real priority with Oregonians as well as with the legislature and the governor. The other agency that grew is like Judicial Department, and I have no clue on that one. Yeah, so that's kind of, we've seen the increase in the headcount increase. It seems, we would probably give the data to the agency heads, but it seems like it would be consistent with the services that we are being provided. And I'm not going to go over this because we only have about 20 more minutes left. So there was a quirk And the only point to make is whenever you're looking at data, you find quirks in the data. And it's good to get them documented. So let's look at the salaries now, right? We looked at headcount, and we looked at where the headcount increased. And so drop the NAs, I dropped the zero salaries, and looked at. Now the interesting, so here's what we are looking at. But there's an interesting thing. The minimum salary is just a few $1,000s, right? It's like 6,000 at the most for 2021 at 22. Are we really paying somebody $6,000 a year? Probably not. So the chances are that potentially for part-time workers, the salaries are not being annualized. So we are just how much they were actually paid rather than what they were paid on an annual basis. So it's not so much a salary as a payment that is being recorded. And so that's going to skew the results, right? Because if we are looking at people being paid amount for different amounts of time, we can't make a fair comparison. So we look at it, we drop the part-time employees and then look at the minimum, the statistics for just full-time employees. And when we look down the full-time employees, it looks like it might be the full-time employees are annualized, but not the part-time. Can't be sure about this without actually talking to somebody who knows this data. But this looks like, especially for 2024, it looks like this might be an annualized salary. So you will just make the assumption for the purposes of this. Oh, by the way, I did not give a complete data set. I have just shown excerpts because there are 89 different agency codes, and that's just too much to fit. So they are in the data set, but just not shown here. Yep, hopefully. I'm going to go through this, and I really do want to kind of try how do we talk about lived experience. Okay, so we will so yeah, anyway, so we will only look at full-time employees. And then because the part-time salaries don't look like, so here is the how salaries vary across agencies. And the medians, there's a huge difference from mental health, the mental health regulatory agency, which is like $53,000, to the legislative fiscal officers, which is $176,000. So yeah, again, it's interesting to see that, but really raises more questions, doesn't answer questions, right? Because then we have to look at what the salary classifications are, what the job requirements are, because the job requirements might be very different, and that would is what would reflect what the salaries are across those agencies. Now, the key question then from for me, a number, having a median salary of something doesn't matter, that it went up doesn't matter. As somebody who is earning a salary, I want to know, did my earning power stay up? So we compare it to inflation. Again, I got inflation for calendar year, salaries are fiscal year. Just keep that in mind. I don't, for illustrative purposes, it's okay. And again, so I'm making a disclaimer here. I could be talking utter nonsense because I'm not an economist, but based on very simplistic calculations, it looks like the median salary did keep up with inflation, maybe a little bit ahead, not hugely ahead, but and when we look at it, that the increase in salary just kept up with the living wage. I'm sorry, with the cost of living. The living wage is a little bit different than a cost of living adjustment. Then our increase in salary expenditure is not coming because you're hiring more workers. I mean, we are hiring more skilled workers, but we are just paying our workers more to adjust for cost of living. So it's coming from hiring the more workers and then lifting everybody's salary to meet the cost of living increases. Okay. And then again, let's look at it. Now this is kind of looking at the lived experience. We looked at the cost of living adjustments. We looked at inflation. That I'm not sure of the difference between the two, but I'll use inflation because that was one. But then we also look at now how many people are being paid a livable wage? Okay, so we have several standards for, we have the green line here is the federal poverty level. And as we see, there are very few people who are paid less than a federal poverty level for a family of 4. The median salary is marked in blue. So that's about half up above and half up below this. But I only looked at a livable wage for 2024 because I could not find the livable wage for earlier years. And the orange line here is a livable wage for a single working class adult. And when we look at that, there are about 4,000 or so people within the state system who are paid less than the livable wage. And then we have about livable wage for a single adult. And then we have about 13,000 people working for the state that are paid less than what a livable wage is for a family of 4 with both working adults. So this would be the salary for each of the adults, assuming that they earn the same. So that's kind of one way of looking at the lived experience. What does it mean? I'm earning a living because I want to live a certain quality of life. And there are 2 ways of looking at it. Does my salary keep up as the living costs go up? And and is it a livable wage? Because a cost of living, even if you get a cost of living adjustment, but your salary itself is not livable, it doesn't really help much. You still come out below. Now, I want to say that this is really a first brush calculation because I took numbers for Oregon, but within Oregon itself, we have different geographic areas where there are different costs of living. Your livable wage will be different in Portland than if you go to Burns. And so we need more data to really this is that first brush. We'd have to dig deeper into it because maybe all the people who are earning less than what is the Oregon average livable wage, they might be in rural areas. They might be in areas of the cost of living, so we can't really make any conclusions other than we need to look deeper over here. So again, there was a question about lived experience. Now, what I have done here is I've translated the statistic into something relevant in our day-to-day lives, right? We've talked about a livable wage. What does it mean? Now, what I have not done here is get the qualitative data. So if I was really doing a report, I would actually talk to the people and say, what does it look like if you are earning this amount? You want to know where your money is going, what you feel, and that's the human story. And so in an ideal world, you always pair your quantitative results with the qualitative. What does it feel like for people who are actually living it? So that's kind of, and so you look at the statistics and then it helps you highlight what stories you need to get the lived experience for. So, and I began doing this because one of the key things is, again, from an equity point of view, are we treating the people who earn less the same? Are they getting the same increase as the people who earn more? And I began doing it for people who earn less than 50K and people who earn more than 130K. And I was doing it this morning, 2 hours before. And as you can see from these results, they don't look right? We saw a 24%, 27% increase in median salary, and here we are seeing. And so I was looking at it and saying, no, there's something wrong here. And yes, there is something wrong. I prematurely cut off, when I selected people less than $50,000, for both of them, I did a premature cutoff. And so the data is wrong. But I wanted to leave it in here because it shows that we need to double check. And we always need to be thinking about, does this seem right? What is that mistake that I've made here? So this one is wrong, and I did try to, I deleted my slides. So I just kind of wanted to say, you will run into dead ends. It's good to run your analysis by your sense of what is right as well as if you have somebody to review it, it is always very good. So now let's go back. So we've done an analysis. We've tried to keep this multiple perspectives in mind. We try to answer it from the employee's perspective, the union's perspective, the cost of living increases, the livable wage, as well as the agency heads and legislative, which is the total expenditures and where the headcount went. And now, we will probably be wrapping up all this, and we'll be producing some kind of report. And I'm not going to go through it. We saw the key findings and stuff. We will write it up and we'll put the diagrams and everything. But then as we are writing it, we need to keep in mind, does this analysis, is this written in a way that empowers the people, right? And can the different people find this report, this potential report, and can they understand it? Like, is it available to them, and is it digestible? If they see an error, if they have further questions, can they contact you as the analyst or you as the analytical team? And again, is this transparent? Those are the key pillars that we talked about earlier. So as you're writing it, make sure that you write it, the different findings, so that they will be accessible to the target group that they are aimed at, right? Because you write differently for legislators and you write differently for people who are state employees or for people. So make sure that you write it in a way that is digestible and actionable for them. So here are kind of my notes on, because we haven't gone into data communications, but here are my notes on data communication. I'm a data nerd. I love tables. As you saw, I had tables wherever there was. But it does interfere. It's fine for an analytical stock because that's what we're going to be looking at. But it is best to include them for reference and transparency. And if they interfere, so you have to include them, but put them in an appendix if they interfere with the flow. Think of your audience. If they have to be there, but oh, thank you. Tana says that they're important for screen readers as well. Thank you. That's not something I had kept in mind. And again, when you're talking about numbers and statistics, always ask the question, who does this matter to and what does it mean to them? So quote the number and statistic, but add why it's important, why you think it's important, and what does it mean in terms of the lived experience. So if you say the median salary is so much, okay, that's a number. What does it mean? And in this case, it would be comparing it to a livable wage, right? Because that's what the people, state employees, like, am I making a livable wage, would be interested in from a meeting. Again, this is something we're only talking about the analytics. Using stories from people is a powerful way to supplement quantitative analysis. And remember, humans are storytellers and math wizards. We tend to forget, this is my personal opinion, but I will say this. I think everybody is good at math. We beat it out of them in middle school. And if we take the fear out, we all know our numbers. Anybody who's tried to balance a budget, anybody who's tried to do any kind of planning, even a recipe, they know the numbers. So let's keep that in mind. And this is a very important thing. I mean, this was a very, very simple analysis. But as even that, I did make a mistake, which had to ground truth. But whenever you have a complex model, you really want a more complex analysis. It means you have a lot of assumptions. And so a lot of ways to make, to go wrong. And so whenever you have that, you have to ground truth it. It's like, does what it predicts, does what it say, or the way I'm interpreting it is the actual truth. So you actually have to go out and talk to people or whatever. Sometimes you have to in the environmental world, it means you actually go out and take new measurements based on the prediction and see whether they match the predictions or not. And so these are the takeaways. I hope will be useful. I'm not going to read them, but I'm going to, because I will, yes, I will PDF this and send it to Audrey so that you can all have it. And I'm going to hand it over Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hand it over to Amina.
Thank you, Meenakshi. That was a fantastic, super fantastic presentation as usual. And the Meenakshi, being as wonderful and gracious as she is, was talking to the SORA board members, and we came across the knowledge that after seeing her wonderful presentation, you all might be interested in having some hands-on experience with doing some of the analysis that you saw for inclusive analytics. So I'm going to drop a survey in the chat right now. It's a very quick 4-question survey about whether you'd be interested in attending a workshop where you can do some of this analysis with Meenakshi and other people that can help, if you're interested in learning technique in doing this type of analysis. And I think the coding language that will be used is R, but it's going to be, I think it would be wonderful if anybody's interested. So please take the survey. We'll also send the link, I think, when the slides and other things are sent out to people. But if you can, just take a few minutes and let us know if you'd be interested in participating in a workshop to continue the conversation and learn how to do some analysis in an inclusive way.
Amina's Carly says that she's getting the message you don't have permissions to view or respond to this form, and
Okay.
with four thumbs up. So
okay, let me because it should be for anybody in the state of Oregon, but let me check that. Thank you for letting me know. So it's just 1 second.
Yeah, I will have to say technology is both a friend and a foe.
And it's crazy because I sent out the link yesterday, like, hey, does this work?
Yeah,
But
well, and
yeah.
I
Go
do
ahead.
note that the folks who have mentioned are external.
Okay.
So it is possible that it's just a Oregon.
Right.
It's working for folks in Oregon. It might not work for folks external.
Okay. Let me change the settings.
Because it's I'm sorry, that's
Carly
maybe
says,
it's working for folks in DAS, but not in boy, now I really don't know.
That's what I think. That is what the DAS tenant. Oh God, I've had that problem.
Yeah, it could be a DAS tenant issue.
Yeah, the DAS tenant issue. So
we'll
those of you who don't
this.
know about tenant issues, be very happy.
Okay. I'll work on this, and then but prior to us sending out the link again with the slides and whatnot to make sure that this is something that people who are outside of the Oregon tenant can access and use, because that's something we want. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get sorted for y'all.
Yeah.
And thank you for attending. Thank you again to Meenakshi for a wonderful presentation and for being willing to do this for us today. I want to mention again, we will have this presentation available both on our YouTube channel and on our website. And I saw a request for the slides as well. We will make the slides available if you're amenable to that, Meenakshi. So
yes, I'm going to PDF. Should I send it to you? Okay.
Yeah. Just go ahead and send it to me, and I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go. So we'll make sure that folks have access to everything they need to have, or they could ever want. And thanks again for participating today. We're really appreciative of your interest and your dedication to your work for the state of Oregon. So thanks again for attending.